Cops uncover a strange scene after opening a Vatican tomb. Gone without a trace. Every parent's worst nightmare shortened to just 4 words. Your child's missing and your life will never be the same again. Sometimes, however, there's hope. Clues are found or the police get a good tip. But other times, even when you have endless clues, something gets in the way of justice. For Pietro Orlandi, the sacred walls of Vatican City contained a sinister plot. Somewhere inside, his sister Emanuela had vanished without a trace decades earlier. And recently, for the first time, he walked those historical, ornate streets with a spring in his step. He wasn't excited, but ready for the mystery of his missing sister, Emanuela Orlandi, to finally be solved after decades. All Pietro had to go on was a cryptic message from an anonymous source. Look where the angel is pointing. In Vatican City, where Emanuela and Pietro grew up, angel statues were on every corner. Finding the right one would take some serious dedication. The weight of the mystery had been on Pietro's shoulders since 1983, since the day Emanuela asked him to accompany her to her music lesson and he declined out of brotherly annoyance. It was a decision he came to regret. He and Emanuela's childhood was spent playing in the magnificent Vatican gardens and, according to Pietro, occasionally chatting with Pope John Paul II. A family of 7, the Orlando family felt that they lived in the safest place in the world. Until June 22, 1983, when the family's illusion of safety was shattered forever. Emanuela was used to the long journey to her flute lesson in Rome, but having some company always made the trip go faster. Pietro refused. Emanuela was never seen again. I've often thought, what if I had gone with her? Pietro confessed in a 2019 interview with the BBC. From the moment his family discovered she was missing, Pietro knew he would never outrun his guilt, and investigators couldn't provide much hope. So the Orlandi family did what anyone would do. They spread the word. The story of a missing 15-year-old girl from Vatican City traveled all over Italy, and it's remained in the public's consciousness ever since. Of course, everyone had a theory. First, Emanuela ran away from home, then she was kidnapped, then taken by the mob. Each theory resulted in more questions than interested parties had before. The family was desperate for clues, but despite their effort, they always landed back on square one. And the Orlandi family and investigators remained at square one for decades, despite hundreds of tips from all over the country. Emanuela, it seemed, was gone forever. Until a 2005 theory emerged that pointed investigators in a new, unnerving direction. Another unknown person contacted Italian police, and what they said sounded like a plot to a mobster movie. According to the anonymous tip, Emanuela had been abducted at the request of Cardinal Ugo Paletti, the Vicar General of Rome, back in the 1980s. The story only got stranger. Investigators were told that the secret to the mystery lies in a tomb in St. Apollinaire Basilica. Specifically, it was the grave of notorious gangster Enrico de Pettis. It sounded far-fetched, but there was one detail the police couldn't ignore. The gravesite was located right by Emanuela's music class. Still, police needed more than just an anonymous call to open the grave. Luckily, de Pettis' mistress provided just the information they needed. In 2008, she told police that de Pettis' involvement wasn't just coincidental. She claimed that de Pettis himself had participated in Emanuela's abduction, and that her remains had been buried beneath a house outside Rome. The Orlandi family held on to the claim, praying for some kind of closure. But it never came. After following the lead and opening de Pettis' crypt, police found nothing, once again leaving the Orlandi family without any answers. Still, Pietro refused to give up. In the same year, the investigation once again took a bizarre turn. Of all the places Emanuela could be, no one had ever suspected the Vatican, at least not seriously. This changed when renowned Catholic exorcist Gabrielle Amorth suggested that Emanuela had been abducted into a sex party network and killed, and that the Vatican was involved. But after police investigated the claims, they again returned with nothing. Still, the damage was done. For many of the case's followers, the Vatican would always be a suspicious player in Emanuela's disappearance, especially in 2018 when the case took its weirdest turn yet. The Orlandi family received a strange item in the mail, a photograph of an angel statue with a message. "Look where the angel is pointing." Investigators knew this could be their last shot at uncovering the truth. Their search for the angel took them to Teutonic Cemetery, where they hoped and feared Emanuela's remains would be buried in a royal tomb. But there was a catch. The Orlandi family needed the Vatican's permission to enter the sacred cemetery. This was a tall order, considering their less than friendly relationship with each other. But after a year of campaigning, the Vatican and the Orlandi family were finally in agreement. It was time to put this tragedy to rest. In July 2019, forensic teams began collecting DNA from the Tomb of Interest. The mystery that had stumped the Orlandi family and all of Rome for decades hinged upon those DNA tests, which would take weeks to analyze. Pietro was torn. He was desperate for closure, but it meant admitting that his sister had been dead all these years. To think that we'd been so close to my sister for so long without knowing it, it makes me feel horrible. In fact, I actually hope that Emanuela is not there, Pietro admitted. In the end, he got his wish. Not only was Emanuela not in the tomb, but no one was, at least not in the part above the trapdoor. In another bizarre twist, police found a trap door in the tomb that concealed 2 ossuaries, or a place where human bones are laid to rest. Amazingly, remains were found, and forensic scientists were quick to test the DNA. But no evidence was found that remains belonged to Emanuela. Though this came as a major disappointment for followers of the case, for Pietro, the empty tomb was a sign that Emanuela may not be gone for good. "She was trying to teach me a Chopin piece," he recalled, "and then she went missing." Despite the years of disappointment, Pietro believes that Emanuela still could be out there. "I hope one day she comes back to teach me the rest." Though the wish was far-fetched, Pietro knew all hope was not lost. Other abductees like Rosalind McGinnis proved it. She grew up in Missouri, where she spent her days with her brothers at Park. Still, there was something about Rosalind that was extra special. She was one of the most ambitious 10-year-olds at the school. She had dreams of becoming a veterinarian and of teaching violin. But these dreams were crushed the day her mother met a man named Henry Piet. At 10 years old, the sexual abuse began. He was never a stepfather, Rosalind said of Henry Piet. He was a child predator. Rosalind would always be haunted by these events, and by the events that would soon take place. Henry exerted his control over the family by moving them to Wagoner, Oklahoma, far away from the McGinnis family and friends. Now they were isolated with Henry, and things were about to take a bizarre turn. See, Henry attempted to marry Rosalind when she was 11. The wedding took place in a van and was officiated by Henry's son. Henry moved them into a shabby tent outside of Gore, Oklahoma. He was desperate to be alone with Rosalind. On January 31st, 1997, Rosalind's hopes for a successful future were officially destroyed when Henry took her from school. "The next thing I know, my mother's not there, my brothers are not there, and I am by myself with this man," Rosalind said. Gala made flyers printed with Rosalind's description and the plea to please help find this child. They stopped searching right before Rosalind's 13th birthday. Her family thought she'd be missing forever. And for a while, this didn't change. After kidnapping her, Henry stripped Rosalind of her identity by forcing her to wear glasses and to dye her hair black. He had them both assume aliases, with Rosalind as Stephanie and himself as Billy Ira Sloop Jr. When she was 13, Rosalind miscarried her first baby. "I don't even know how any human can do that to a child, what he did to me," Rosalind said. Henry smuggled Rosalind into Mexico, and when she was just 15, Rosalind gave birth. They lived in poverty without the basic necessities new mothers require, like gas, heat, and other utilities. Still, Rosalind continued to have babies. Henry spent what little money they had on drugs and alcohol, so she had to figure out how to survive on nothing. She begged on the street for money and even sold ice cream for pennies. Henry was also getting more violent. The violence escalated from beatings to shootings, and Henry once sliced Rosalind's arm so badly that it cut to the bone. Life was beyond bleak for Rosalind until she met Ian and Lisa. The British-American couple often saw Rosalind at the grocery store, and they soon struck up a friendship. They just wanted anybody to talk to because it was not something they were allowed to do, Lisa said of Rosalind and her kids. Unfortunately, this brief hope for Rosalind wouldn't last. Always on the move, Henry moved the family to a more remote location in the Oaxaca Mountains, once again cutting Rosalind off from any familiar faces. Here, she couldn't even beg for money. They were all just trapped. All seemed lost. Except, unbeknownst to Henry, Rosalind maintained communication with Ian and Lisa. Though they did not immediately realize that something was amiss, when the couple visited Rosalind at her new home in 2016, they saw the truth of her situation. When Lisa and Ian went inside the ramshackle home, what they saw was horrific. 3 stalls instead of bedrooms, holes in the walls, and very, very thin foam exercise mats for beds, Lisa described. Rosalind and her kids were no longer just living in poverty, they were all living in hell. Lisa eventually learned Henry's real age, 62, which was when she did the math. If Rosalind's oldest child was 17, that meant she must have only been 14 or 15 when she gave birth to him. Lisa told Ian, "This is wrong. There's something seriously wrong." Later, while Rosalind was recovering from gallbladder surgery, Henry became belligerent and ordered her to do housework. That's when Rosalind had an epiphany. "I knew that if I didn't get out of the house, I'd either go insane or I'd end up dying and leaving my kids with that man," she said. When Henry was passed out, Rosalind grabbed her kids and escaped to Ian and Lisa's house. Thanks to them, as well as the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Rosalind legally crossed the border into the U.S. Still, Rosalind kept looking over her shoulder in fear of seeing Henry on her heels. Every night, according to Rosalind, she had nightmares of a menacing Henry standing over her bed. She knew the only way she'd be free of him was if she shared her story with the world and stood with other victims of abuse. She also hoped her story would bring Henry to justice. On June 13, 2019, Henry was found guilty of kidnapping, engaging in a sexual act with a minor, and a myriad of other charges. While the rest of the world applauds Rosalind's bravery, she can only think of one thing: her freedom. "It's a miracle I'm sitting here today," Rosalind said. She has hope for a better future, propelled by a promising GoFundMe page that's already raised $50,000. Rosalind knew she would never get her childhood back, but she could try to salvage what was left of a childhood for her kids. Rosalind tapped into incredible strength when she picked her kids up and ran out the door. It was a calm, cool collectedness similar to that shown by Cheryl Treadway on a warm spring day in May 2015, when her boyfriend, Ethan Nickerson, pulled a large knife on her. The couple's 3 young children were at school when the 26-year-old grabbed the blade and confiscated his longtime girlfriend's cell phone. He kept Cheryl locked up tight, so she started thinking of ways to escape. Without her cell phone, she couldn't call the police, and screaming for help she knew would likely not have the results she wanted. So she appealed to Ethan's sense of fatherhood. She had to pick the kids up from school. Ethan agreed, but he insisted she couldn't go alone, which was why he accompanied her to the elementary school to pick the kids up. They all rode home, probably in silence, the kids in the backseat unaware their father had just pulled a knife on Mom. Back at home, Cheryl was in an even worse place than she started. Not only was she stuck with knife-wielding Ethan, but now her 3 kids were too. She couldn't pick them up and run, but what could she do? Cheryl thought hard, knowing the cost of a misstep, and then an idea hit her. She found Ethan and once again appealed to his fatherhood. "The kids are hungry," she said. "Let's order a pizza. Let's get them some food." Ethan considered this for a moment. Maybe he felt a rumble in his own stomach, but he agreed. The kids were hungry. Pizza would do the trick. He relented and let Cheryl use her cell phone, but only to order pizza through the Pizza Hut app. Cheryl had her phone back, but she couldn't call the police. What if he heard her talking? What if he checked her call history? Would he snap and use the knife he kept on his person? She had to be clever, so she was. See, when you ordered a pizza through Pizza Hut's phone app, there was a comment section to include special instructions. You could ask for extra pepperoni or leave a door code for your apartment. Cheryl used this to her advantage. Along with an order of a large pepperoni pizza, Cheryl included a note to employees in the comment section. It read, "Please help, get 911 to me, 911 hostage help." She placed her order, closed her eyes, and waited. That was all she could do. Meanwhile, employees at the local Pizza Hut gathered around the computer, aggregating online and app orders, all fixated on Cheryl's message, "Please help." In 28 years on the job, restaurant manager Candy Hamilton had never seen anything like it. Inside her home, meanwhile, Cheryl waited by the window, watching. She didn't know if her message was well received at the Pizza Hut. The feeling of dread must have been palpable. What if they thought her call was a joke, a prank? But because Cheryl frequently ordered from Pizza Hut, the employees recognized her name. They knew this was no joke. "We didn't even question it," Candy Below said. "We immediately called 911. The call reached the Highland County Sheriff's Office, which dispatched Lieutenant Curtis Luden and his deputies to the home of Cheryl Treadway and Ethan Nickerson. They parked their cruisers out front. The relief Cheryl felt as the police arrived must have been euphoric, but still she had 3 children to escort from the home before Ethan noticed the police. If he did, would he use that knife on her? Salvation was so close, but only if she played this smart. With her youngest child in her arms, Cheryl wrenched open the front doors, running for the police. Before she could catch her breath, she told Lieutenant Luden that her other 2 kids were stuck in the house with a knife-wielding Ethan. Though she didn't know it at the time, Cheryl was incredibly lucky. You see, Lieutenant Luden happened to be the lead negotiator on the crisis team. He talked down any number of people in his career. Ethan, he knew, would be another tally mark. The deputies escorted Cheryl to safety, and Lieutenant Luden went to work on Ethan. After 20 minutes, the lieutenant convinced him to drop his knife and surrender. Officers recovered the other 2 children unharmed. Cheryl and her kids were finally safe. Afterward, Lieutenant Luden celebrated Cheryl's smarts. "I don't know if I ever would have thought of it," he said. "I mean, it's just something that she did so naturally. The boyfriend never knew about it until he saw us coming around the corner." Candy, the manager of the Pizza Hut, praised the mother too. "She's the hero in this situation," Candy said. "She just thought outside the box. I think that's amazing." Incredibly, pizza saved another life just a few years later.